At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. A few cards fluttered between Nim Valois' fingers, rippling from black to red in the bar's thick air. They blurred, then resolved. The two of spades, the knave of hearts, and the queen of clubs had become identical aces of diamonds. The small, grimy crowd around his table gasped. A Valaxian transport pilot whose arms forked at the elbow clacked his jaw plates in appreciation. A human prospector, his face a roadmap of deep lines and sun-cracked skin, shook his head and slid another low-denomination credit chip across the sticky table.
Again,
the prospector rasped, staring at Nim's hands.
I was watching that time. I swear I was.
Nim smiled, an easy, disarming gesture that left his eyes cold. The eye is a slow and clumsy student, my friend. It believes what you tell it. He scooped up the chip with a subtle turn of his wrist, and it vanished into his sleeve. He leaned forward, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. The hand, however, is a master of lies. He spread the aces across the table, then snapped them up in a neat fan. He was a performer, and this bar on Acheron Station was his stage. The audience was a mix of desperate, bored, and dangerous. He made his living reading which was which, and knowing when to fold. He glanced over the onlookers, past the eager faces and the drunken ones, to a table in the corner. A group sat there, drinks sweating in front of them. They stared at him, their attention fixed past the performance, their expressions flat and analytical. The central figure was a crane, a species whose fibrous anatomy mimicked petrified wood. His body was a collection of dense segments of tissue, striated with dark grain under a polished hide. His head was a smooth, blocky affair, dominated by a single large optic that shimmered with internal divisions. It tracked Nim's hands, his face, and the exit simultaneously. A cold knot formed in Nim's stomach. Nim wrapped up the show with a final blurring motion, producing the prospector's chip from behind the Valaxian's auditory sensor. The small crowd applauded, their appreciation genuine but their pockets shallow. They dispersed, leaving Nim to gather his meager earnings. He packed his worn deck of cards into a leather case, each motion economical and calm. His mind mapped the room, plotting pathways between the tables to the exit. The crane in the corner was Galt, first mate on the pirate vessel, the Golden Dirge. Nim knew the name, the ship, and the reputation. He nodded to the bartender and headed for the back exit, his pace deliberately casual. The alley behind the bar stank of stale beer and vaporized coolant. A rusted metal staircase led up to the station's upper concourse. Freedom. He took a step toward it before a body blocked the light from the doorway.
Nim Valois.
A voice rumbled behind him, textured like stressed timber. Nim stopped. He made a slow turn, the charming smile snapping back into place. You have me at a disadvantage, sir. You know my name, but I can only guess at yours. Galt stepped from the doorway, flanked by other pirates. The crane focused his composite eye's internal lenses on Nim.
I am Galt. Captain Lysander wishes to see you.
The Captain Lysander? Nim's smile widened. I'm flattered, but my booking schedule is quite full. He reached into his coat, brushing his fingers against a hidden pocket in a familiar motion. Perhaps I could interest you in a game of chance, a small token to remember our meeting by. He produced a silver coin, balancing it on his knuckles. With a flick of his thumb, he sent it spinning into the air. It glittered under the dim station lights in a mesmerizing arc. As the pirates looked up at the coin, Nim's other hand darted for a seam in his trousers, reaching for a hidden flashbang pellet. The coin hung at its apex, then vanished. Galt darted his hand out, a block of petrified wood moving with startling speed, and snatched it from the air. At the same time, he clamped his other hand around Nim's wrist, the one reaching for the pellet. Nim's bones ground together under the pressure.
Your hands are quick,
Galt stated.
but predictable.
A cold dread washed over Nim. The misdirection had failed. Galt's thumb pressed down on a nerve cluster just below his wrist. Fire exploded up his arm. His vision flared white and his limbs went slack. He collapsed, his body failing him. The alley ceiling spiraled into black. The lost image, Galt's singular segmented eye looking down at him with the cold indifference of a geologist examining a rock. Consciousness returned in pieces, like a deck of cards scattered across a table. First came the low thrum of the ship's drive, a vibration that resonated deep in his teeth. Then the scent of superheated circuits and something cloyingly sweet, like overripe fruit and polish. Then the sight of gold. So much gold. Nim was on his knees. Guards held his arms, their grips bruising. He was on the bridge of a starship, but it looked more like the throne room of a forgotten god king. Garish, gold-colored metal plated the bulkheads, reflecting the light from a dozen ornate chandeliers. Mother of pearl inlaid the control consoles. And on a command throne that was less a chair and more a gilded sculpture, Captain Lysander lounged. The Silenian Ascendancy's royal crest decorated its headrest. The Silenian moved with a coiled smoothness, his long limbs unspooling as he rose. He was tall, achingly slender, with skin composed of tiny layered scales of nacre that captured the light in the shimmering patterns of azure and emerald. He wore a uniform of immaculate white and gold, its cut so sharp it seemed folded from light. An energy blade with a hilt of spiraling silver rested on the arm of his throne.
Release him.
Lysander's voice was a rich, theatrical baritone that filled the bridge. The guards shoved Nim forward and stepped back. Lysander uncoiled from his throne. His limbs had too many joints, bending in unsettling arcs as he circled Nim. He appraised the human's unassuming frame and worn traveler's clothes with his slitted eyes. Galt stood near the main view screen, a silent, monolithic crane.
So, this is the master of legerdemain.
Lysander mused, his tone flat.
Galt spoke of your skill. I confess, I expected more.
Nim pushed himself to his feet, rubbing his aching wrist. He kept his expression neutral, his posture submissive, a player on someone else's stage. He understood the part he must play. Lysander laughed, a sound like chimes breaking on an anvil.
Galt appreciates only brute force. He is a cudgel who sees every problem as something to smash.
He pointed a long, elegant finger.
But I am a connoisseur of talent. Show me, dazzle me, prove that you are more than a common street hustler.
This was the test. Nim met the captain's gaze. Lysander craved more than a pirate crew. He wanted an audience. Of course, Captain! Nim reached into his coat and produced his deck of cards. He offered them to Lysander. Please, examine them! Assure yourself they are ordinary. Lysander waved his hand dismissively.
Details are tedious. Proceed.
Nim nodded. He held up a single card, the King of Spades. He showed it to the captain, then turned it over, showing its plain patterned back. He placed it on his open palm. With his other hand, he wove a soft weaving gesture above it. He coiled his entire focus into the performance. The card lifted from his palm. It floated an inch in the air, wobbling slightly. The bridge crew murmured, their bored expressions giving way to fascination. Lysander leaned forward, his expression filled with genuine interest.
Impressive,
the captain breathed. A simple parlor trick, Nim said calmly, but perhaps ill-suited for this parlor. With another gesture, the face on the hovering card shimmered. The king's image dissolved, a glowing, intricate sigil materializing in its place, the same royal crest he'd seen on the throne. Lysander narrowed his eyes, the smile vanishing from his face. The crew's murmurs died. Then, just as swiftly, his theatricality returned. He threw his head back and roared with laughter.
Magnificent! A trick with a sting in its tail. You have nerve as well as talent.
He clapped his hands together.
I am delighted.
Nim brushed the card with his fingers, and the tiny holographic projector he used vanished into his palm. He let the card drop back into his hand, the illusion broken. I aim to please!
And please you have,
Lysander declared.
for now.
He gestured to the guards.
Take our new guest to the brig. Let him contemplate his next performance.
As the guards hauled him away, Nim scanned the bridge, memorizing the layout. He noted the ornate scrollwork on Lysander's uniform, the master keycard's shine clipped to his belt, and a door the throne's drapery concealed, a private exit. They dragged him past a series of cargo holds. He noted a large crate stenciled with bold letters, Menagerie, Warning, Photic Dune Reaver. He filed the detail away. Then they passed the engine room. The air grew hotter, thick with the smell of energized plasma. Through the opening hatch, he glimpsed a being unlike any he had seen before. She was tall and spindly, her body a latticework of green sinew and polished metallic filaments. A pair of primary arms ended in delicate three-fingered hands, while smaller, multi-jointed manipulators unfolded from her forearms, a blur of motion as they tightened a coolant feed with a hydrospanner. Adjunct. She was arguing with her own guards. A device on her collar translated her voice, a series of sharp, resonant chimes into flat, unaccented standard. The cyclic variance is outside acceptable parameters. If you want this heap to move under its own power, you will let me retune the injector assembly. One of her guards shoved her back. Just fix the leak, Bug. The captain wants full power. The junct swiveled her head, and the twin lenses floating in the liquid medium of her ocular globes shifted, locking on Nim's for a fraction of a second. She held a cold, burning frustration he recognized. She was another prisoner, biding her time. The brig was a sterile box of gray metal. A curtain of agitated energy wavered in place of a door. Nim sat on the hard metal bench, sifting observations for an edge. Lysander's craving for drama, the junct engineer, the bridge layout. Pieces of a puzzle, but he was still in a cage. Hours passed. The ship's low hum was his only companion. Then the energy curtain hissed open. Captain Lysander stood there, a vision in violet and gold this time, a smug smile on his face.
I find myself in a peculiar state,
the Silenian announced, stepping into the cell as if it were a royal court.
I am bored.
Nim remained seated. A common affliction among those with too much power and too little imagination. Lysander's smile was thin.
Your wit is a double-edged blade, magician. Be careful lest you cut yourself on it.
He paced the small cell like a caged serpent.
Your little display on the bridge was amusing. The flattery was clumsy, but the execution was novel. However, a single trick is insufficient to earn a permanent place in my troupe.
I was unaware I was auditioning, Nim said dryly.
Everything is an audition, human. Every moment of your life.
Lysander stopped and looked down at him.
I require a grander spectacle. Something to truly entertain my crew. They grow restless with simple plunder. They need a story to tell.
He leaned in, his sweet metallic scent filling the air.
I will offer you a glorious chance at freedom. A contest, you and I, before the entire crew.
Nim raised an eyebrow. A contest of what? Witty repartee?
A duel,
Lysander said, his eyes holding a dangerous glitter.
I will set the blades to stun, of course. I am a connoisseur, a patron of skill. We will use training blades. A contest of skill, of speed, of style.
And the stakes? Nim asked, his mind seizing on the opportunity.
Simple.
Lysander spread his hands.
If you win, you are free. Your ship, your possessions, all return. You may leave with my blessing and a tale of how you bested the great Captain Lysander.
He chuckled at the thought.
If you lose, you belong to me. You will be my personal entertainer, my court jester. You will perform when I command, for whomever I command, for as long as I command.
I accept, Nim said.
Excellent!
Lysander clapped his hands.
The duel will be at the start of the next command shift. Prepare yourself.
As the captain turned to leave, Nim spoke again. I will need a moment before the contest to prepare my mind. A performer needs his ritual. Lysander paused at the doorway, looking back with an amused smirk.
Rituals, superstition. How quaint.
He shrugged.
Well enough. You shall have your moment. I am, if anything, a patron of the arts.
The energy curtain snapped back into place, leaving Nim alone. He closed his eyes, seeking focus, and his true preparations began. He ran a hand over his jacket, feeling for the small weighted pellets sewn into the hem. He tested the tension of a thread on his left cuff, loosening it just so. He shifted his weight, ensuring thin, flexible steel plates sat correctly in his boot linings. He prepared his stage for the duel. The hangar bay control room was a bubble of reinforced transparisteel perched high on the main hangar wall. Below, the entire crew of the Golden Dirge had assembled, a motley collection of species from a dozen worlds, their faces upturned, waiting. The room itself held blinking consoles, the nerve center for launch and docking operations. In the center, a cleared space waited. Captain Lysander swept into the room. He wore black leather trousers and a flowing, high-collared shirt of shimmering silver. He drew his weapon, an energy rapier that hummed and crackled with contained power, its setting dialed down to deliver a painful shock. He executed a series of lunges and parries, his blade a blur of silver and green, basking in the crowd's roar below. Nim stood opposite him, holding the weapon they gave him, a standard-issue shock baton, a clumsy, brutish thing. He looked small and out of place in his simple clothes.
Are you ready to make history, magician?
Lysander called out, his voice amplified, ringing throughout the hangar. I'm ready to make an impression, Nim replied, his voice calm. The duel began. Lysander flowed forward, his attacks a constant stream of stabs, slashes, and feints. The man was a skilled duelist. Nim stumbled. He tripped over his own feet. He fumbled his baton, nearly dropping it twice. He dodged Lysander's strikes with wild, flailing motions that looked more like panicked luck than skill. Each clumsy maneuver, each narrow escape drew a fresh wave of laughter from the crew below. A clumsy stumble to the left brought him dangerously close to Lysander's side. For a brief instant, as the captain sidestepped, Nim grazed the Silenian's belt with his right hand, a feather-light contact lost in the clumsy motion. A dramatic forward roll to avoid a low slash ended with him on his back. Lysander laughed and stepped over his prone body to press the attack. As he did, Nim shot his left hand up. He found his target. Lysander lunged, the tip of his rapier crackling. Nim executed a flashy, desperate spin. In that moment of shared focus, under the cover of his own spinning body, he finished the job. Lysander performed a disarming maneuver, a flick of his wrist that sent the shock baton flying from Nim's grasp. It clattered against the far wall. Nim, defenseless, fell to the floor near the main hangar command console base. He lay there, panting. The crew in the hangar bay erupted. They roared, they cheered, they stomped their feet. Lysander struck a triumphant pose, planting a foot on Nim's chest, his rapier held high. He held the pose, basking in the crowd's roar. Lysander's victory speech was as flamboyant and overwrought as his throne room. He spoke of his own peerless finesse, his unmatched skill, and the glorious destiny of his ship. The crew hung on his every word, their laughter at Nim's performance still echoing in the cavernous hangar. Nim lay on the floor, the weight of Lysander's foot pressing into his sternum. He remained still, his gaze fixed on the captain, his expression unreadable. He waited for the speech's rhythm, for the perfect theatrical pause he anticipated Lysander would take. It came after a particularly boastful line about his own magnanimity. Lysander paused for effect, letting the crew's cheers wash over him. In that pocket of relative silence, Nim's voice cut through the air. Though quiet, his voice was clear, calm, and carried an unnerving confidence. "Check your pockets." Lysander faltered. He looked down at the human, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He laughed it off, a dismissive chuckle meant for his audience.
What was that, little man? A final, pathetic jest?
But doubt took root. The crew's cheers quieted, giving way to curious murmurs. Nim remained silent. He stared up at the captain, his gaze unwavering. Almost unconsciously, Lysander reached for his belt. He patted the spot where his master keycard should have been. He found only empty fabric. His arrogance gave way to confusion. Confusion curdled into dawning horror. Horror bloomed into raw panic. He patted his belt again, frantically this time. He checked his coat pockets, his uniform, his face a mask of disbelief. And then Nim moved. With a slow, deliberate motion, he raised his hand. Held between his thumb and forefinger was a thin, golden card, Lysander's master key card. A collective gasp went through the hangar. Lysander stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. Before the captain or his stunned crew could react, Nim twisted his body. He slammed the key card against the emergency access reader on the hangar control console's base. The world went crimson. Klaxons blared, a shriek that tore through the air. Emergency lights strobed, bathing the hangar in red light. Heavy blast doors, thick enough to withstand a torpedo blast, slammed down over every exit, sealing the hangar bay and the entire crew inside. A secondary door slid shut, locking the control room itself. In the first seconds of chaos, as pirates scrambled and Lysander bellowed in impotent rage, Nim pried open a maintenance panel near the floor, a panel he had spotted when he first entered the room, and disappeared into the dark, cramped corridor behind it. He had lost the duel, and in doing so, he had just captured the entire ship. The maintenance shafts of the Golden Dirge were a warren of conduits, wiring, and structural supports. The air was thick with the dust of ages and the hum of hidden machinery. Nim moved through the darkness, the master key card in his hand. Tapping the card against any control junction gave him access to the ship's schematics, a glowing blue map that bloomed in his mind's eye. The lockdown created chaos. Now he had to direct it. He used the keycard to selectively open and close ducts, creating a path for himself while sealing off corridors where the heavy tramp of search parties echoed. Galt would be organizing them. He was shimming through a particularly narrow utility crawl space above the engine deck when a noise ahead caught his attention. A rhythmic, metallic scraping. He froze, flattening himself against the tube wall. A section of crawlspace wall ahead sparked, then fell inward with a loud clang. The junked engineer squeezed through the freshly cut hole. She held a plasma torch in one of her upper hands, its nozzle still glowing faintly. She swiveled her head, her liquid-filled eyes taking in the entire space in an instant, and fixed on him. "You!" Her translated voice hissed from her collar, flat and accusatory. "Me!" Nim agreed, keeping his voice low. He held up the master keycard. "I believe this belongs to the captain." The junk's posture shifted, hostility giving way to calculation. "The lockdown! That was you!" "Necessary diversion, and you took advantage of it." "A power surge to the blast doors caused a momentary fault in the brig's energy field. I was ready." She gestured with the plasma torch. "Give me the card." Nim chuckled. "Unlikely. You know how to use that torch, but I know how to use this." He tapped the key card. "And right now, this is the only thing keeping us from a vacuum nap." They stared at each other in the cramped darkness. Nim saw the intelligence in her liquid-filled eyes. She was a mind that solved problems. "I need to get off this ship," she stated. "Popular sentiment, I'm sure," Nim said. "What's your name?" "Tess," she clipped. "Nim, and I have a ship in the hangar bay, the one holding a furious crew." Tess tilted her head. The lenses in her eyes recalculated. You have the access key. I have intimate knowledge of every system on this vessel. I had to repair most of them. A partnership, Nim mused. I handle the people, you handle the plumbing. I distrust you, Nim said bluntly. Good, Nim replied with a smile. Never trust a magician. But you need what I have, and I suspect I'll need you to keep that plumbing from exploding before we can leave. Tess considered this for a long moment. The logic was inescapable. Agreed, she said. For now. The first problem, we are moving toward the aft sections. Galt will have sealed the perimeter. He will be sweeping inward. We need to go against the current. Then let's show him a new trick, Nim said, and with their tense alliance forged, they plunged deeper into the machine's guts. On the bridge of the Golden Dirge, command had fractured. Captain Lysander was screaming at his officers, his voice echoing off the golden walls. He hurled accusations of incompetence, of treason, of letting a single unarmed human humiliate him. Galt ignored it all. The captain's rage was a predictable variable, a storm he could weather. He stood before the holotank, the ship's shimmering wireframe hanging in the air. He absorbed streams of data from the projection. The ship was locked down tight. Hangar bays, docking ports, escape pods, all sealed. He had turned his vessel into a fortress and a prison. He's trapped, the weapons officer, a bulky Gila kin, growled. Now we just find him. Finding him is the challenge, Galt rumbled, his voice cutting through Lysander's tirade. He holds the key. He can be anywhere. He can see our movements. A conventional search is futile. He divided the ship's schematic into a grid. We start from the hull and work our way in, sector by sector. Life support will shut down in each cleared sector. We will flush him out. We will shrink his world until he has nowhere to hide. His strategy was systematic and logical. He treated the problem as the containment of a virus. He accounted for everything but the fact that this particular virus had just teamed up with the ship's own immune system. Checkpoint ahead, Tess whispered, her voice a dry crackle from Nim's comm bead. They crouched in a ventilation duct overlooking a major corridor junction. Below, a squad of Galt's most trusted pirates had set up a scanning station, their weapons ready. They're boxing us in, Nim murmured, watching the guards. Galt's predictable. That's good. Tess peered through the gate. Her liquid-filled eyes afforded her a much wider field of view. Their comms are on an open channel. Sloppy. They rely on fear over procedure. A piece of filed-away data surfaced in Nim's mind. Tess, can you access the ship's manifest through the keycard? Of course. Look for something under Menagerie, Nim said. Specifically, a photic dune reaver. Tess was silent for a moment, her nimble fingers tapping on a data slate she had linked to the key. I have it. A single specimen, live, held in Cargo Bay 4. The manifest marks it as highly dangerous. Is it still there? Another pause. The life support readings for that container are flat. The internal temperature matches the ambient hold. It has been empty for some time. Lysander likely lost his pet and failed to update the manifest. It is obsolete data. Far from obsolete, Nim said with a grin. It's perfect. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a simple audio modulator. He handed it to Tess. Can you patch this to their comm frequency? I need you to create a feedback loop, but filter it. Make it sound distant, like it's echoing through the vents. Tess looked from the device to Nim, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She took the modulator and with a few swift commands on her data slate, tapped into the pirate's channel. Nim leaned close to his comm bead. He made a low scraping noise from the back of his throat, the sound of horn on metal. He followed it with a series of wet guttural clicks. Below, a guard flinched, tapping his earpiece. What was that? Probably just drive interference, another grunted. Nim made the sound again, louder this time. Tess manipulated the signal, adding layers of reverb so it echoed from the vents all around them. The guards grew tense, their eyes darting nervously toward the ventilation shaft's dark mouths.
Did you hear that?
One of them whispered, his voice tight.
Yeah,
Another replied.
sounded big.
Nim delivered the final piece. He took a deep breath and let out a high-pitched, skittering shriek, a sound of alien hunger. Tess blasted it over their comms. Panic flared.
The Dune Reaver!
A guard yelled.
It's out! I heard stories about what it did to the last crew that tried to feed it.
He motioned to his partner.
You and I, we check the forward vents. You two, hold this position. Shoot anything that moves.
A pair of guards scrambled down the corridor, weapons raised, a primal fear of the unknown shattering their discipline. The others stood their ground, but their attention divided, their glances darting nervously toward the sounds of their comrades' retreat. In the silence they left behind, Nim and Tess dropped from the vent. They slipped past the distracted guards and into the corridor beyond. Tess glanced back at the weakened checkpoint.
The probability of that succeeding was low.
Never bet against fear and a good story, Nim said, patting her on the shoulder. She flinched at the contact, but held her ground. A low series of clicks emitted from her translator, a noise like a grudging chuckle.
Your methods are illogical.
But effective, Nim finished for her.
But effective,
she agreed. They found refuge in a forgotten storage room deep in the ship's habitation ring. A museum to Lysander's ego, the room held discarded trophies, gaudy furniture, and crates of ridiculously expensive, terrible-tasting wine. It was a forgotten corner of the ship. They sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the glow of Tessa's data slate. For the first time since their frantic escape, they had a moment to breathe. "Why are you here?" Nim asked, his voice soft. "How did you end up a prisoner of the gaudy captain?" Tess kept her gaze on her data slate, but she stilled her fingers.
Lysander's crew raided my colony on Vespa 6. We are a small outpost of engineers and scientists.
Her voice was a flat recitation of painful facts.
They took our supplies, our power cells, and they took the atmospheric processor, a custom-built unit, the heart of our life support.
She looked at him, and her liquid-filled eyes held a cold fury.
Without it, the air purifiers will fail within 70 hours. My world will choke to death. I tracked them here. I was attempting to retrieve it when they captured me.
Nim was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in the small room. His fight was for his own skin. Hers was for an entire world. "My grandfather was an illusionist," he said, the admission surprising even himself. He guarded his past closely. "A real one. Taught me everything. How to read a room, how to palm a key, how to build a story in someone's head. He used to say that magic was the art of directing attention. People see what they expect to see."
Your grandfather taught you how to be a criminal?
Tess stated. Nim smiled faintly. "He taught me how to survive. The syndicate I borrowed from. They undervalue my particular brand of performance art. Been on the run ever since." He looked at the key card in his hand. "This is the biggest stage I've ever been on." Tess turned back to her database. She produced a small data wafer from a sealed pouch in her jumpsuit.
On my world, we plan for contingencies,
she said.
I wrote an exploit for their command architecture, but I lacked an opportunity to install it.
She interfaced the wafer with her data slate, linking it to the ship's network via the keycard. Her primary hands and finer manipulators moved across the screen, a blur of motion as she bypassed security protocols and uploaded the package into the ship's core.
It just needed a door. You brought me the key. Your grandfather manipulated people. I manipulate machines,
she continued.
The principle is the same. Lysander expects a direct assault. He expects us to run for the hangar. Galt expects a logical, predictable pattern of evasion.
So we give them something else, Nim said, catching her train of thought. We direct their attention.
Exactly,
Tess said.
and while they look elsewhere, we do something unexpected.
Nim found an unsecured comms terminal in a deserted mess hall, a relic Lysander had neglected to replace with a golden one. Tess bypassed its security protocols in seconds.
Ready,
she announced. Nim leaned toward the microphone. He pitched his voice lower, using the modulator to add a layer of gravelly distortion, making it unrecognizable. He sent the message to the ship-wide frequency, a channel reserved for the captain's announcements.
A word of advice for the crew of the Golden Dirge.
His disguised voice rasped through every speaker on the ship.
Ask yourselves, how does one human with a deck of cards lock down the entire ship? How does he move unseen? Unless he works with an ally inside.
A calculated pause.
Who benefits most when a captain looks like a fool? Who stands to gain when the ship is in chaos? Be careful who you trust.
On the bridge, Lysander heard the message. His face, already contorted with rage, became a mask of dark suspicion. His gaze swept over his bridge crew. The Gilakin weapons officer, Dask, met his look with a defiant glare. Dask had questioned Lysander's tactics before.
It was you!
Lysander shrieked, pointing a trembling, scaled finger at him.
You let him escape! You want my ship!
That's insane, Captain! Dask roared back, taking a step forward. Galt moved between them, a wall of petrified wood.
The message is a trick, a tactic to sow dissent. Or it's the truth!
Lysander screeched, his paranoia flaring.
Arrest him! Throw him in the brig!
2 guards loyal to Lysander moved hesitantly toward Dask. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances. The bridge, once a symbol of Lysander's absolute authority, was now a powder keg. Galt watched it all, his composite eye unblinking. He understood the human strategy. He was doing more than running. He was actively dismantling the ship's chain of command from the inside out, and Lysander, in his arrogance, was helping him. That bought us some time, Nim said as he and Tess navigated a series of catwalks above the main engineering deck. But Galt's too smart to ignore that chaos for long.
The distraction served its purpose,
Tess replied, her eyes on the data slate.
It drew Galt's attention to the bridge, to personnel management. It has left the ship's core systems with a skeleton crew.
She brought up a new schematic, a complex diagram of the ship's primary plasma reactor and its associated systems.
Just escaping is a poor solution. They would shoot us down before we cleared the hangar doors.
We need a bigger diversion, Nim finished, understanding her logic. Something that forces their focus onto the ship itself. Tessa's fingers snapped on one section of the schematic.
The primary coolant regulation system. It is delicate. If we overload the primary flow valve, it avoids a reactor breach. The system is designed to fail-safe.
But, Nim prompted.
But,
Tess continued,
the fail-safe protocol is a mandatory vessel-wide evacuation. Alarms, escape pods launching automatically, a complete system shutdown to prevent a meltdown. It would trigger pandemonium.
A magician's favorite environment, Nim said with a wolfish grin. It's a beautiful plan. It's also probably the most heavily guarded part of the ship.
It is,
Tess confirmed.
Its defenses make it the one place they believe is secure.
Their new goal was set, to bring the entire ship to its knees before they escaped. Galt stood on the silent bridge. Lysander had retired to his quarters to sulk after his paranoid outburst. The crew was on edge, morale shattered. Galt dismissed it all as noise. He focused on the data. He analyzed the path of the fugitives. He saw the diversions, the ghost stories, the planted rumors. He discarded them. They were misdirection. He looked at the underlying pattern. Where were they avoiding? The hangars, the escape pods, the docking bays. Their goal was something other than escape. He cross-referenced their path with a schematic of the ship's vital systems. They were moving steadily downward, deeper into the ship's core, toward engineering.
They are attacking,
Galt rumbled to himself.
not running.
He processed the possibilities. Weapons control, shield generators, too heavily guarded, too direct. Life support, possible but slow. What system, if disabled, would create maximum disruption with minimal force? His analysis settled on the coolant regulator, the target for a saboteur. It was critical, complex, and vulnerable to someone with insider knowledge. Someone like the junked engineer. He had their plan. Ignoring the protocol of informing the captain, Galt gathered his most loyal and disciplined men, a squad of shock troopers who answered only to him. He kept the alert localized to his personal channel. He maintained a deliberate pace. He would wait for them at their destination. The final approach to the coolant control room was quiet. Nim and Tess moved through the humming corridors of the engineering deck like ghosts. Tess's knowledge of the ship's blind spots in the sensor grid was perfect. They bypassed the outer security patrols, remaining undetected. Their diversions had worked. The door to the control room was a heavy blast door, sealed with a magnetic lock. Tess pressed the master key card to the panel. With a heavy hiss and a clank of locking bolts, it slid open. They stepped inside. Harsh, white emergency lighting bathed the room, revealing it was occupied. Galt stood in the center of the room, a heavy plasma rifle held at the ready. His squad of 6 troopers flanked him, their own weapons raised, red targeting lasers dancing on Nim's and Tess's chests. The door slid shut behind them, sealing them in. It was a trap.
Your methods are clever, magician.
Galt's voice was a low growl.
But your destination was logical, and logic is predictable.
Nim held up his hands, opening his mouth to launch into a fast-talking routine, a final, desperate bluff. Before he could speak, Galt gave an order.
Stun them,
his voice flat and final. The world dissolved into a blinding flash of blue light and the overwhelming sensation of 1,000 stings. Nim's last conscious thought was that, for all his cleverness, he still ended up on the floor. Again. Guards dragged them back to the bridge like captured animals. The mood on the bridge was triumphant. Lysander was back on his throne, his ego restored, his arrogance in full display. He gloated over his captives, forcing them to their knees before him.
So the great magician's final trick ended in his capture,
Lysander sneered.
How utterly pedestrian.
He took the master key card from Galt.
Secure the card, Captain.
Galt rumbled, his voice low.
It is a tactical weakness.
Lysander laughed, a sharp, ugly sound.
Nonsense, Galt. Let the crew see the symbol of my authority restored to its rightful place.
He placed it on the central console with a flourish, a king reclaiming his crown.
It is an instrument of drama. I believe a public execution is in order,
Lysander continued.
A fitting finale to our little drama. Inadvisable, Captain,
Galt said, his tone still level.
They have information. The Junk's colony. The Magician's syndicate contacts. They are more valuable alive. Valuable?
Lysander scoffed.
Their value is in the lesson their deaths will provide.
He leaned down, getting inches from Nim's face, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss.
You sought to make me a fool in front of my crew. Instead, you have given me the grandest stage of all. Your despair will be my masterpiece.
This was the last chance, the highest risk gamble of his life. As Lysander gloated, his opulent uniform brushed against Nim's shoulder. Nim's hand, bound in front of him, moved in a subtle motion. His finger and thumb, with nimble dexterity, pinched a tiny metallic disc from a hidden pouch in his sleeve and pressed it into the elaborate golden filigree on Lysander's collar. The tiny holographic projector from the hovering card trick. It clung there, nestled against the gaudy uniform. He had made the transfer. Now for the trigger. Nim looked up, meeting Lysander's gaze. He pitched his voice so the entire bridge crew could hear. An audience always wants a big finish, Captain. Are you sure you're the one giving it? Lysander laughed, delighted by Nim's defiance. It made the victory all the sweeter.
Oh, I am quite sure.
He turned to his guards.
Take them to the airlock and broadcast it to the entire ship.
As the guards moved to obey, Nim locked eyes with Tess and yelled one final cryptic word, a cue. Encore! It was Tess's signal. While all eyes on the bridge swiveled to Nim, she exploded into action, a blur of green sinew and metal. She lunged for the central console. In one fluid, desperate motion, she snatched the master keycard and slammed her free palm down on the ship's emergency broadcast panel, the physical trigger for her program. The effect was instantaneous. The bridge's main view screen, which had shown the peaceful starfield of the outer verge, flickered. It filled with dozens of hostile ship signatures, all bearing the transponder codes of the syndicate Nim was running from. Red alert klaxons, the real ones this time, blared to life. The ship's automated voice announced, "Warning, multiple hostile vessels detected. Brace for impact." The comms channel crackled with faked, panicked audio Tess had pre-recorded. "Boarding parties detected on decks 4 and 9. They're cutting through the hull." And on Lysander's chest, the holographic projector flared to life. It projected a single, terrifying image directly onto his uniform, the snarling wolf's head insignia of the Syndicate's elite kill squad. The bridge crew stared, their faces a mixture of terror and confusion. They saw their captain, marked with the emblem of an approaching enemy fleet that had appeared from nowhere. Into the heart of the chaos, Nim screamed, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "He led them to us! It was a setup! He sold us out to the Syndicate!" The anonymous message questioning the captain's competence, Lysander's paranoid accusations against his own officer, and now this. The crew, their loyalty already worn thin, hesitated. The seed of doubt Nim had planted bloomed into open mutiny. Galt was the only one on the bridge who saw through the illusion. His composite eye darted from the frantic crew to the view screen, to Nim, and he understood. It was all a trick, a grand, magnificent, audacious trick. He moved to intercept Tess, his massive frame a force of nature. But Nim was there first. He stepped into the Crane's path, a willing obstacle. "Look around you, Galt!" Nim yelled over the klaxons. He pointed a bound hand at the panicked Lysander, who was babbling denials, and then at the bridge crew, who were starting to draw weapons on each other. "Your ship is tearing itself apart over his ego! The operation is failing! Save the ship, or save the man!" Galt shoved Nim aside with enough force to send him sprawling, but he ignored Tess. He went to the holotank controls. His first priority was to verify the external threat and regain control of his ship. His loyalty was to the system, above the man who had so thoroughly compromised it. He began barking orders, trying to restore order, his attention completely diverted. In that critical moment, he abandoned his captain. "Go!" Nim shouted to Tess. She was already moving. With the keycard in hand, she slapped a panel by the bridge entrance. The heavy blast doors hissed shut, sealing them out and sealing chaos in. They were free. The race to the hangar was a blur. Tess was a master of her environment, the keycard a skeleton key to the entire ship. She used it to override systems, shut down entire corridor sections behind them, and reroute power to clear their path. The ship itself stymied Galt's pursuit at every turn, now actively working against him. They burst into the hangar bay control room, the site of Nim's feigned defeat. Below them, in the main hangar, sat Nim's ship, the Rabbit's Foot. It was a small, battered-looking courier vessel, more junk than starship. And on a cargo sled nearby, unguarded in the chaos, was a large, complex piece of machinery, Tess's atmospheric processor. But the room was occupied. Standing before the ramp of the Rabbit's Foot was Captain Lysander. He must have used his private exit from the bridge. He was alone, his energy rapier drawn and humming, his face a mask of cold, murderous rage. The illusion was shattered, his crew in mutiny, his ship in chaos. All he had left was his pride. "Get the processor," Nim said to Tess, his voice low and steady. "Prep the ship for launch." Tess sprinted to a hangar terminal, her fingers blurring across the controls. The heavy anti-grav lifts on the cargo sled hummed to life, and the atmospheric processor began to float slowly toward the open cargo bay of the Rabbit's Foot. Nim walked forward to meet the captain. He kept his hands, still bound, held loosely in front of him.
"No more tricks, magician,"
Lysander hissed, his voice trembling with fury.
"No more illusions. Just you and me."
"That was always the problem, Captain," Nim said, circling him slowly. "You thought this was about you and me." He kept talking, his voice calm. He deconstructed Lysander's entire world, piece by piece. He explained how he had read his vanity from the moment he stepped on the bridge, how Lysander's need for a spectacle, for an audience, was the very tool Nim had used to defeat him. "You're a performer, Lysander, just like me," Nim said, "but a bad one. You love the applause more than the art. You let your audience control you." As he spoke, he performed one last simple trick. A coin, one he'd had concealed in his bonds, appeared at his fingertips. He tossed it in the air, caught it, made it vanish, then reappear behind Lysander's pointed ear. It was a cheap street corner trick, an insult. Lysander lunged, his rapier slashing through the air where Nim had been a second before. Nim stopped. He looked the pirate captain dead in the eye. Then he did the last thing Lysander would ever have expected. He tossed the master keycard, which Tess had slipped to him on their way to the hangar, onto the floor between them. It clattered on the deck plating, a splash of gold in the harsh hangar light. "You should hold on to this," Nim said, his voice laced with the dreadful faint pity. "The captain should always go down with his ship." It was the final humiliation. It robbed Lysander of his dramatic victory, of his honorable duel. It framed him as the architect of his own downfall, left to clean up the mess while his nemesis simply walked away. Lysander stared at the keycard on the floor. His mind, which had been focused on the singular goal of killing the human, stalled. He had been offered a fight, but was given a mirror. The reflection stalled his mind. That hesitation was all the opening they needed.
"Nim, now!"
Tess yelled from the cockpit of the Rabbit's Foot. The atmospheric processor was safely stowed. The pre-flight checks were complete. He turned his back on the frozen captain and sprinted up the ramp. It hissed shut behind him, sealing him inside the cramped but familiar cockpit. He threw himself into the co-pilot's seat, the Durasteel cool against his cheek. Tess's hands and manipulators danced across the controls. The engines roared to life, a powerful, defiant scream that echoed through the hangar. With a lurch that pressed Nim back into his seat, the Rabbit's Foot lifted off the deck. Tess slammed the throttle forward, and the small ship blasted out of the hangar bay, leaving Lysander standing alone amidst the flashing red lights and the blaring klaxons of his broken kingdom. From the cockpit of the Rabbit's Foot, they watched the golden dirge shrink behind them. A crippled vessel, a gaudy monument to a fallen ego, still blinking with emergency lights. Clear, safe, free. Nim let out a long, slow breath he had been holding for the past day. He worked at his bonds, and the cheap magnetic cuffs fell away with a nimble flick of his wrists.
"Processor is secure,"
Tess reported, her voice as flat and factual as ever, but some of the tension had left her latticework frame.
"All systems nominal. Course laid in for Vesper 6.
Her mission was complete. She would save her people. Nim leaned back in his worn chair, the familiar squeak a comforting sound. He looked over at the junked engineer, a partner forged in chaos and desperation. "So," he asked, a smile touching his lips, "where to next, partner?" Tessa's twin lenses swiveled to him for a moment, then back to her navigation console. A series of soft, rapid clicks came from her translator. It was the closest thing to a laugh he'd ever heard from her.
"First we deliver the processor,"
she said.
"Then I have identified several shipments of high-grade processing cores belonging to a syndicate that operates in this sector. Their security is reportedly predictable."
Nim's smile widened into a grin. He looked out at the star-dusted blackness ahead, toward their next performance.